Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, William White, and with me as always are Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe. This week we'll dip into the mailbag for some listener feedback. Then we'll ponder just how necessary conductors are. And finally, we'll discuss a recent documentary from Martin Scorsese. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment. So, Tiffany, what do we have today?
This week, we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Viola Hero. In the world of classical music, the viola is often overlooked and maligned, the red-headed stepchild of the string section. With this game, we seek to bring awareness to the irreplaceable value of the viola in well-known orchestral works. Here's how we'll play. I'll name a category of symphonic repertoire and then play for you a few bars of just the viola part from a famous work. I have my trusty viola with me, and my co-hosts, along with all of you at home, will try to identify the piece after hearing the excerpt. Here we go. The first category is orchestral suites.
Okay, let's give this a listen.
Okay, boys.
I think I've got it. And I didn't have it until you very generously gave us some chords at the end, some harmonies. I believe that this is. Let me make sure I know the exact name. It's Boudoir from Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. That is the Polish pronunciation, Boudoir. But maybe more of our listeners would be familiar if I said Bydlo, B-Y-D-L with
I've
a
always
little
heard
slash.
Bydło.
Bydło, yeah, you can say that too.
Yeah, this is my favorite of all the pictures. I just really like this one.
It's mine too. Mine too.
And that's
Absolutely.
the point at which the ox cart looms closest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Next excerpt. This is from we'll call it an early romantic symphony.
I know what it is.
Go ahead.
It's second movement of Mendelssohn's Scottish, yes?
Yeah.
The third symphony of Mendelssohn, right?
Yeah. Okay, third excerpt. Here we
Nice
go.
job, Kensho.
Very good, Kensho. This next one is from, I can't go too narrow here, so I'm just going to say it's Baroque.
Ah, wow.
I don't know. It was a very gentle dog.
Kensho, did you say a gentle dog?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what this is then?
Yeah, it's Vivaldi, Four Seasons. It's... Oh, shoot. Which one is it? It's spring, right?
Yeah, it's the middle visit of
Spring with the dog. It's supposed to be the dog barking.
It is the dog. Yep.
Wow, good job.
All right, 3 for 3.
3 for 3. Go team.
Yay.
That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds, so we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, we move on to our first topic. Kensho, what do you have for us?
Okay, GabFest listeners, you've been listening to us for the past few weeks, and now it's time for us to listen to you. We've received a ton of feedback so far, so we won't be able to get to everything, but rest assured, we do see it all and we'll respond to everything via email or social media, if not actually on the podcast. Thanks again to everyone who's written in, and please, listeners, if you have feedback for us, whether it's something we got right, something we got terribly wrong, topic or guest suggestions, or anything else, please email them to us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com or find us on social media. All right, so let's start off with listener Eric. Will, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, this is a lovely email from listener Eric. He says, "Greetings, GabFest hosts. Your most recent episode with its discussion again of Beethoven's metronome markings," and here he is referring to episode 49 from back at the beginning of August, "reminded me of a passage in one of Erich Leinsdorf's books. In a section on tempo, he rather summarily brushes aside other views and opines that because Beethoven was figuring out metronome markings years after the pieces were first composed, he was hearing everything faster in his head, as, according to Leinsdorf, that is just what happens when one hears a piece in their mind." Listener Eric then says that he's wondering what our thoughts are about Beethoven tempo marking specifically, or issues we have run into, if any, in terms of the tempos of pieces that we hear as we study them versus actually sounding them with other musicians. He finishes by saying, "Thank you for all you do with the podcast. It has turned out to be one that I download as soon as I see new episodes available." Love that. So what do you think, guys? Tempo inside your head versus tempo in real life. Is there a conflict there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm going through this right now, studying Beethoven 9 and looking at all those tempo markings, because some of them actually are more commonly done than the others. And of course, there's recordings where people do exactly what the metronome markings are. But it's just think about your own perception of tempo, because I find that at least maybe the cliche is that younger conductors tend to take things a lot faster and then slow down with age. So the corollary with Beethoven looking back and hearing things faster seems kind of contrary to that. I don't know.
Well, I would just enter here and say that composers tend to think of their own music too fast. Because there you don't even have a recording to reference, right? I mean, you, Kensho, can study all of these other recordings of Beethoven's Ninth and see what people have done. And if people, are really sticklers for these metronome markings, you can hear what that actually sounds like with an orchestra. With a composer, you're just imagining this music in your head, or maybe you're, hearing it perfectly mathematically played on your computer these days. And it's you get a little charge from hearing it fast. But in real life, it just doesn't sound good.
Yeah, well, I was going to actually bring up this very point about, this problem that you mentioned being, exacerbated in the current day, just because when people just, push the button and hear the computer play it, they don't appreciate the difficulty of playing any such instrument. I mean, this is, a part of the landscape that I don't quite like about modern composition, is that I don't feel as if the kind of idiomatic writing for violins and pianos and so on is as native to the composer language as it used to be. I mean, Mendelssohn, wrote peerlessly for the violin because he knew exactly what string crossings worked, right? And I will say also, just to bring it back to Beethoven, might I speculate that because he was deaf, would that make the problem worse? What do you think?
Oh, many people have speculated that very thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess those are our thoughts. Great question, listener Eric.
All right, let's move on to listener Michael. Tiffany?
Well, and you should mention who listener Michael is, by the way.
So we were very happy to hear from Michael Mitnick himself, who is the writer of the very screenplay that we read a few episodes ago, episode number 60, which was a Leonard Bernstein biopic. So he writes to say, I really enjoyed listening and hearing Professor Nigel Simeone's parts that he liked. That was a thrill for me. His book of letters is the only book that has made me miss my subway stop 3 times. He reports that the reason for the absence of West Side Story from the screenplay is that the estate, the Bernstein estate, would not let us touch it because of the Spielberg movie, despite my desire to focus on the writing of it. We still have the writing of One Hand, One Heart and opening night when Lenny's dad famously told him, you realize why I was so hard on you? How could I have known you'd grow up to be Leonard Bernstein? I appreciate the space and time you've given the screenplay. Most screenplays are never heard from again. I feel gratified that I got to hear you as well as the official editor of Leonard Bernstein's letters, and a writer I also respect, find value in the thing.
Very cool that the actual writer of that screenplay listened to the episode and was pleased with what he heard.
Yeah, it's nice of him to write in. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
All right. The next bit of mail comes from listener John. And he writes, Hi there. I'm several weeks behind in listening to the Gabfest. How dare you? And only recently listened to the episode where you answer a listener question about classical music themed novels. I would like to share a novel that was not mentioned, but which I think you would collectively enjoy. Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien is a generation-spanning novel set against the backdrop of post-war Chinese history. One of the main characters is a composer, and his story mirrors that of actual composers who were at the Beijing Conservatory during the Cultural Revolution. Bach's Goldberg Variations plays a key symbolic role, as does Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto and several other pieces from the classical canon. This novel inspired me to, among other things, familiarize myself with 20th century Chinese composers and have since enjoyed exploring the works of my God. Why did you give me this one? I mean,
Jeff, do you want to step in here?
Yeah, Xian Xinghai, Chen Gang, Ma Sichong, and Wang Xilin.
Among others. Even if you do not read the book, I strongly encourage you to get to know these composers better if you are not already familiar with them. If you do end up reading this book, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I read it with a dear friend who was, like me, a classically trained pianist and composer, and it was a very meaningful and rewarding experience. Thank you very much for the effort you put into the show. Sincerely, listener John.
That's very thoughtful.
I think it's a great idea for a book club. I think that should be our next book club.
Yeah, that sounds rather
great,
enjoyable,
yeah.
actually. Yeah. I remember seeing a lot of these names because way back when I actually wrote an undergraduate thesis on the role of classical music in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So I do know some of these names, although probably not even as well as would, give me the right to, say that I know anything from this book. But I will recognize some of those names.
And then I guess John also wrote to us on Instagram too.
Yeah. He gave us a little Instagram comment pretty recently. He says, I agree with your collective assessment of the AI-assisted completion of Beethoven's 10th Symphony, in quotes, of course. In summary, blech. But I strongly disagree with you about the value of such endeavors. It may well be pointless to use machine learning to generate an endless stream of competent mimicries of a given composer's music. I am, however, excited about the possibilities for using machine learning techniques to develop a deeper understanding of the music that has already been written by humans. Consider the incredible linguistic insights that have come out of the deep learning techniques Google has developed for Google Translate. Here's a summary. He links to a medium.com article that we will put in our show notes. Think of what these techniques could teach us about the deepest layers of musical language. It's exciting stuff. Fair points. I haven't read the article yet, but I look forward to getting into it, seeing what that might have to say about it. Yeah.
Thank you, John, for that hat tip for this Medium article. Next one is coming from listener Jeff. Tiffany.
Jeff writes, Dear Gabfesters, I listened with interest to your recent discussion in episode 54 about prime phonic and adagio, as well as the more mainstream music streaming services. The one service to which I subscribe is YouTube Music, formerly Google Play Music, which is not perfect but affords the added benefit of ad-free YouTube. However, I also have access to the Naxos Music Library. It's pricey, $21 a month or $210 a year, and then more for the premium quality option. But it is also available free of charge through many college and university libraries, and sometimes included as a perk for subscribing or donating to musical organizations. The Naxos Music Library, of course, offers all of the recordings available on Naxos and its affiliated labels, as well as Deutsche Grammophon, Sony Classical, Chandos, and dozens upon dozens of specialty labels. Not every album one might want is included. The same goes for the mainstream streaming services. But Naxos has really solved the problem of classifying classical music. One can search by composer or work, and each composer has a list of works with available recordings. Each album track links both to the composer and the work. Each work links to albums that include it. An added bonus is that many of these albums include PDFs of the corresponding CD booklets, which is immensely helpful to anyone who writes program notes. P.S. Some forward classical horror stories. These are really good. Grabbed the wrong clarinet.
Ooh.
Long tacet. No cue. True story. Fortissimo trumpets, no shields.
Those are good
really
ones.
good. These are really good.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, have you guys used much Naxos?
No.
I know that, like, through all the institutions that I've been affiliated with for the last 10 years, because I've been in school for the last 10 years and remain in school, I do use Naxos, but there are a couple annoying features about using it, chief of which is you have to be rather specific when you're doing your search. Like, there's not a, kind of Google helping you correct misspellings or this kind of stuff. If you want what you got, and that is down to even, well, it's been a while since I've tried this, but I don't even think that, like, it will give you alternative spellings of Rachmaninoff versus Rachmaninoff, right? Which I think, like, you have to be really specific when you search. I don't know whether this has changed in the time that I've used it. But the second and more pointed gripe that I have with Naxos is that you have to know exactly what you're searching for. And then when you play items, you have to pick the items from a list of the search results that the thing returns. And then it will then, upon your selection of those tracks that you actually want to hear, pop out another window that has all of those in a little playlist. So it's kind of like a double layered kind of access thing, which I find very inhibitive to exploring music. So that's my main gripe with Naxos. I do agree with the quality of the taxonomy and the categorization.
$21 a month, though.
But you get to read the CD booklets. Maybe we would actually know which Stradivari Janine Jansen was playing.
If only.
All right. Moving on. Our last bit of mail comes from, of course, listener statistician Christopher, and he writes, "Hey, Classical Gabfest, listener statistician Christopher here, and I want your hot take on this. Let's revisit my infamous Name That Tune submission, Kevin Putt's Symphony No. 2, Island of Innocence."
One of our all-time great achievements on the Name That Tune.
That's true. Absolutely. Throughout the piece, Putz layers many contrasting rhythms across the orchestra within a mostly 3/2 time signature, creating a complex flow with various strong beats occurring in any given measure. In one performance, the conductor decided to help the orchestra keep track of the beat by employing an auxiliary conductor, to subdivide the beats for him for a brief section. What do you think of this approach? Would you do this? Have you seen anything like this done before? Christopher out. And he links us a YouTube link to a particular, the performance that he's mentioning. So we'll take a look now and see what we think.
So what is happening here?
I don't know what's happening. I wish we had the
score
score or something, yeah. Is it actually like a totally different time signature?
I think it might be. It would have to be, right? It looks like he's doing like, maybe even like 5 or something.
I think he's doing... Here's the problem. I can't tell what meter either of these guys are beating.
There's a hot take.
So I don't know what the hell is going on here. Would I do it? No.
I mean, there are pieces in which two or more conductors are involved because the ensemble is split in a way where they're actually playing time signatures that have no relation to each other.
Or tempos that have no relation to each other.
Right.
I have been the third conductor in a performance of The Warriors by, what's that kinky Australian guy? Percy Granger. which requires 3 conductors, no fewer than 3 conductors. I was in charge of the metallophone section, marimbas. There was like 18 marimbas or something that I was conducting out of time with the rest of the orchestra. Anyway, it's pretty fun. And Christopher also, in a separate message, he sent us a very brief thing where he said that he was passing through Newport, Rhode Island. Kensho, is that where close to where you are this week?
I don't know. How close is Newport to Providence? I mean, the
Rhode
state itself is so
small.
small.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's very close.
Well, Kensho, you need to get over to Newport so that you can see this statue that Christopher saw there and took a picture of and sent to us because he thought of us.
Is this the hurdy-gurdy statue?
It's the hurdy-gurdy statue, yes.
It's been a while since we mentioned the hurdy-gurdy. I think we really need to bring a segment back about the hurdy-gurdy.
We'll be sure to have Sunny put this on our Instagram for all of you curious people
Do
out
we
there.
know anybody out there who plays the hurdy-gurdy? Like, could they play our theme music on the hurdy-gurdy? I think that's what we need.
The guy, the person who I recommend on our Halloween mixtape, that Brazilian guy who plays all those different early music instrument, crumb horns and stuff, he plays the hurdy-gurdy. So maybe I could reach out.
And then we could do like some interpretive dance with the costumes so that it really fits with the
Absolutely.
vibe.
I think that might be next year's Halloween special.
Sweet.
That might be the big project.
At this rate, we have Halloween specials lined up for 5 years.
It's very true. Yeah, it's true.
And not topics lined up for a month out.
We had a whole segment on this year's Halloween special that we had to cut that's going to go in next year's episode.
Oh, great. These are fun. It's been a while since we did feedback, but thank you so much to all of our listeners who wrote in, and please continue to write us. On to our second topic, William.
Performing without a conductor, liberation or illusion? That's the title of an article from classicalmusic.uk by the South African double bassist Leon Bosch. In his opening paragraph, Bosch develops this question further. He writes, "This clamor for liberation from, quote, autocrats on the podium, unquote, is presumably rooted in the perceived ineptitude of conductors, the aspiration for interpretive superiority, and more fulfilling music making without them. But is the conductor really the principal cause of musicians' disaffection?" He goes on to chart his own career performing in conductorless orchestras, including the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, which he says accumulated unrivaled experience and expertise performing an extensive repertoire without a conductor. Bosch makes the case that much of the clamor for playing without a conductor comes down to the fact that orchestral musicians, particularly in London, where he is based, have so little to say over what they play or how they play it. But he disagrees that getting rid of the conductor altogether is the solution. In fact, he lists a myriad of problems that arise when playing in a large ensemble without a conductor. But he also has some ideas to improve the conducting profession and to bridge the gap in understanding between orchestral musicians and their conductors. All right, Kensho, I want to throw this to you first because you were the one who said sort of offhandedly at one point that you wanted to do a segment about whether play conducting, quote unquote, was a thing. And I didn't really, I think it's a thing. I don't know. Tell me, what's your take on this?
It's interesting how this is, you've kind of pitched this with this intro, because what I see in those scenarios most of the time is basically what's happening is that there is a conductorless ensemble that is accompanying a soloist who then decides in the tutis when they're not playing to kind of gesticulate about because there's nothing better to do while waiting for their next entrance. When I see that, I'm like, okay, why not just stand like you would if there was a conductor and just let the ensemble play without a conductor? Because that, I do agree that actually for a repertoire that allows it and is maybe advantageous for an ensemble to not have a conductor, like as a conductor, I'm like, go for it. That's great. I would love to do that. And as a former instrumentalist, it's really fun. I get that idea of being able to perform in a slightly larger ensemble without a conductor and, I don't know, use more body language and stuff to communicate and make things happen. I think there is definitely a space for that. The play conducting thing for me seems like a little like trying to get the best of both worlds, but not really maximizing the return on either. And so I would love to know, I don't know if you guys have thoughts about what the solution is. Like, have you seen something that was a very effective play conducting where the person's actually conducting?
I think this conversation is actually like in a separate lane from the one that is started by this article. So I'll answer Kensho's question, but like we should get back to like what happens in a conductorless ensemble, and is that really a good way to go anyway? But to talk about the instance in which there is a soloist playing a concerto that also conducts it, I view this act in a similar fashion as I view like a concert of Paganini caprices, which is like, it's impressive because you can, I guess, but I don't actually want to watch it. Because it's like, it's as Kensho said, where it's like, you don't get the maximum return on either, and it is kind of just generally impressive to watch somebody flail around and then also be able to keep track of their part and so on. I mean, I think in a very kind of pedestrian way that is, it belongs in the same category as like virtuoso showpiece concerts.
So let's get back to the main topic here. And Leon Bosch, he lists a number of issues that arise from conductorless ensembles. He says you've got the curse of competing musical agendas. There's the absence of a coherent and unified intellectual, philosophical, and aesthetic framework. I think that those are basically part and parcel of the same thing. Lack of shared musical vision. That's a third thing that's like the same thing. The deployment of conflicting and unsuitable musical and technical solutions. That's interesting. Not that that can't happen from a conductor.
Yeah,
and often
I was about
does
to say
happen.
that's like a chief complaint of most conducted orchestras.
Exactly. Lack of awareness and attention to the more complex questions of balance, color, harmony, and structure. I agree with that. And worst of all, the unwillingness or inability to respond to compelling unspoken cues in human communication. I agree with most of those things as being problems. And another thing that he says in there is what happens when you have conductorless ensembles is somebody has to interpret the music. And it's going to be the most outspoken personalities who make their vision heard. And so if we're going for this utopian idea that everybody, has some say in the matter and that we all figure out the interpretation as a group and stuff, that's just not a reality that's going to happen. Even if we're talking about a chamber orchestra of 30 people.
Right. Like basically conductorless orchestras also still have a myriad of decisions to make, even from the strings, the string aspect, right? Like someone has to decide what bowings to use. Mm-hmm. So you already have this hierarchy. So it's not like everybody's going to input their bowings and then suddenly, the polls, shake out a bowing that everybody is now democratically agreeing to use. In
fairness, I think that a group like the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, they sort of have these assignments and they rotate the assignments of, like who is going to be the concertmaster for a certain concert and who is going to make some of these bowing decisions and be principal, in the section. Because they do understand that like a single person has to make these decisions at some point. I mean, you could just do free bowing, which I always think is an interesting idea. But yeah, I don't know. Here's a question for both of you is like, this article takes as a given that musicians everywhere are anti-conductor. Is this a sentiment that you have run up against a lot?
Well, it's kind of a stereotype, but it's in a lot of the same ways that like our conversation last week started with, everyone thinks that classical music is elitist. Like I think that's about the same level of observation that we're dealing with there. Of course, not everybody wants their orchestra to be democratically run. I don't think anyone in orchestra actually, frankly, when it comes down to it. But that gets to my question, which is, isn't there a space in between one person commands the room at all times and you do everything that they say, and we have every decision be democratically elected? And may I also say that I suppose it marks me as an American that I'm shocked that the economic reality of orchestras does not go on that bullet-pointed list. Because like rehearsals in which we already know as string players, anytime you get into a bowing discussion, that's money down the drain.
Yes,
those are seconds wasting away. You're sitting there waiting for the front stands to talk about some dumb bowing. Just make a decision already. No one cares what the actual decision is. Okay, I'm play acting the very cynical orchestral musician here, understand? But like seconds that trickle away as everyone gets their input on every decision is not a realistic landscape frankly, for anyone, I mean, American or no. I mean, I know we are very, union and like, don't go over the second, but like no one wants to do this. So back to my question, which is there not a space in between conductor calls every shot all the time and this mess that I'm describing?
the problem is that there are going to be those times where one person has to make a decision. I mean, the buck has to stop somewhere. And that's essentially the conductor's role. I also think the conductor's role, as the function of conducting, is what you talk about, Tiffany, is just an efficiency tool, so that you can minimize the rehearsal. And, a group like Orpheus Chamber has, I think, something like twice as much rehearsal per concert than your average orchestra.
That's where the conductor fees go. It's an extra rehearsal time.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So, the money that you would be saving on not hiring a conductor. I'm going to quibble with a tiny, turn of phrase, Will. It's just it's not, the buck doesn't stop because one person has to make a decision. The buck has to stop because a decision has to be made, right? It's not necessarily one person has to make it, which is the whole point of this. But, you could imagine, for example, a model in which every cycle started out not with conductor leading, well, maybe you could lead a read, and then there would only be sectionals for the rest of that rehearsal, where every section got to kind of work on their own issues or whatever. And then maybe the conductor would confer with there's still going to be hierarchy in this in-between space. There's going to be, the conductor would have to correspond with the concertmaster or the principal players of each section, principal flute, whatever, to see what issues were worked on in the sectional, and then maybe answer questions. Maybe that would engender more goodwill in this landscape where everybody in the orchestra feels divested and voiceless. But why don't we get to the suggestion that he actually proposes in the article?
Yeah, so two of the solutions here. One of them is hire conductors who have proven careers as musicians.
That's pretty vague.
This is a summary version. But he says that, conductors should be experienced instrumentalists. And I agree with that to a certain extent. I think you should definitely have experience playing in an orchestra. There's a lot who don't because they're pianists. They might just have experience playing chamber music with other people, but not playing in an orchestra. And I do think that those are two different things. And then his other one, and I think that this would probably ring true to the three of us, is have all orchestral players learn to conduct early in their education. I believe in that. I mean, we all met at a summer music festival where it's a training institution for conductors, and all the conductors have to play in the orchestra, and all the players in the orchestra who are not conductors are sitting there watching, 8 hours of conducting lessons a day. So they at least get to understand an appreciation of what this art form is.
But how early is early? Because I find that I feel like some of the deterrent from wanting to even try conducting is once you've kind of understood what it entails through your own experience of being in orchestras, that you start being maybe it's not for me. But I feel like everyone should have experience before they have that fear. You know what I mean? It should just be something that you do, even from a very young age. If you have chamber music, I don't know, you conduct your quartet or something. It's just part of the education, so that you don't think it's some huge big thing that, oh my God, it's so scary to get up there. Because I feel like that is the big deterrent when you're starting to figure out if you want to conduct or not.
I agree. I mean, I think that we typically think of this as being early in your university education, but I don't see why it shouldn't be high school or middle school.
Yeah. So these two solutions, I'm trying to think about how those two things would change the landscape. And what I see here is that on the one hand, they would have conductors who don't lose touch with what it's like to be a musician. And on the other, they would have musicians who don't lose touch with what it's like to be a conductor. And concretely, I mean, this is not a structural change, right? This is not a change in the way we are proposing to run orchestras, but it's what is being suggested here is just a minor alteration to mentality of being in orchestra rehearsals from both sides of the podium. And that, okay, sure, I'll get on board with basically both of those things, I think. I think that to this day, a lot of my legitimacy on the podium comes from the fact that I really try and keep touch with my roots, and I play, and I think that that's a lot of my legitimacy. Waving a stick is from that knowledge, and I think my players feel it too. I guess I wouldn't mind seeing some structural suggestions, because these are just mentality shifts, right? They won't change that landscape if, in fact, that landscape is so important to change that.
I'll finish this segment just by saying that I think that the reason orchestral musicians don't like conductors is because they don't like bad conductors. And, that's a harder thing to figure out, especially because The people who are in charge of hiring conductors usually have absolutely no idea what conducting is, and so it is very easy for charlatans to break into the profession, and that is a very demoralizing thing.
I'm not even sure that we can completely blame it on just the people who are hiring the conductors who don't know what conducting is, because conducting is a profession in which, unless you live for a full 2.5-hour rehearsal or a week's cycle or even a season, it's easy to mistake somebody for what they're not. It's easy to do. We would all get fooled, you know. Mm-hmm. It is sad to me to look at the field right now and feel like there's not that many conductors I'm feeling inspired by. I don't know if only having great instrumentalists as conductors would fix this. I don't really think it would. I mean, we've been hoodwinked any number of times by great instrumental soloists who want to do this play conducting thing and like conduct the tutti, and like it's garbage, right? There's nothing in line with, and these are great musicians, make no mistake, but it is not conducting. And I don't know what the answer is. I think the problem is a whole lot bigger than even this very tiny window allows.
My only, I'm just going to say my only exception to this play conducting hot take is Barbara Hannigan. When we talked about Barbara Hannigan, but like the fact that you can the fact that she sings and conducts, like that's, yeah. Because you can actually do that, right? Like you can continue to conduct the ensemble while singing.
All right, good points made all around. We'd love to hear from our listeners on this, of course. Is play conducting a thing? And how do we get more inspiration in the conducting profession? Or do we just get rid of conductors altogether? And with that, on to our final topic. Tiffany.
Well, for our final topic, a pair of documentaries premiered on PBS last week. One, The Oratorio, a documentary with Martin Scorsese. And two, Da Ponte's Oratorio, a concert for New York. Together, the two tell the story of how opera and operatic style came to take hold in New York City in the 1800s, and how the watershed concert that achieved this was researched and recreated in 2018. This week, we took a look at the first of the pair. Let's hear a clip.
It's been said that music gives a soul to the universe and life to everything. Almost about 200 years ago, this grand space was the site of a long-forgotten event, the first of its kind. An oratorio, staged as a benefit concert. And I think it's appropriate that it happened here, in this neighborhood, at the intersection of the old world and the new. And this concert happened at a crucial moment in the cultural history of New York City and firmly set the city on course to become the diverse and very vibrant center for the arts it is today.
The action begins in 1826, where Italian legend Lorenzo da Ponte, librettist for Mozart, has faced hard times since moving to America and is alternating work as a professor of Italian literature and grocer in New York City. Wanting to introduce Americans to the joys of Italian culture and opera, he reaches out to well-known tenor Manuel Garcia, urging him to bring his company to New York City. Eventually, they do tour in New York City, culminating their stay with a performance of an oratorio 2000s gathered in the sanctuary at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. The result is magic, planting the seeds of a love of opera in the hearts of New Yorkers. Fast forward to 2018, in present-day New York City, Jared Lamenzo, organist at Old St. Pat's, finds a program for a long-lost oratorio performed at his church in 1826, which of course is the program that Da Ponte mounted. Reaching out to Italian musicologist Francesco Zime, Jared and Francesco piece together the music and work with an Italian opera company, the Teatro Lirico di Cagliari, with Donato Renzetti conducting, to recreate the event, which features music by Cimarosa and Zingarelli, Haydn, and Handel, among others. The documentary is now streaming on PBS, and you can watch it for free via their website right now. We'll drop the link in the show notes, along with that of the sister documentary, A Concert for New York. Okay, let's get into it. What did we think? It was about 55 minutes, told for them, narrated, I guess, by Martin Scorsese. But what did you guys think of the subject material and the story here?
I was fascinated by it because I had no idea that Da Ponte immigrated to America.
Yeah,
until
right?
Today. I was today years old when I knew that. That was like news to me. So it was really fascinating just to imagine that. And also, it was also very interesting how much they focused on like Da Ponte's like lifestyle too, right? Like all the scandals he got into and all of this, like we got a little taste of that from
We love a good sensationalist story writing.
What was it, that movie we saw, the German movie about Beethoven, and there was that one scene with Mozart and Da Ponte there.
That's right,
and we
playing
were talking
pool,
about how
playing billiards.
Yeah,
right?
and it was like a ridiculous like a depiction of the two of them, but actually in a way it kind of makes sense or goes in line with what the documentary was talking about. So I was really interested in the history of that and how, I was just kind of in wonder about that at all.
I wasn't quite as enthusiastic about this. I actually thought it was kind of boring. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I totally agree with you. It was a snooze, but I was trying to find like the highlights.
Oh, they were a
me.
highlight. Yeah, I mean, to me, the highlight was actually learning about Pierre Toussaint.
Yeah.
Who was this
Amazing,
Haitian ex-slave who came to New York and became the hairdresser to like Abigail Adams and Alexander Hamilton's wife, and earned, these people would pay like $1,000 a year just getting their hair done, and so he became super rich, and he bought his freedom and his wife's freedom and all of his family's freedom,
the building of the
and
church.
then funded the building of this cathedral in New York. I mean that give me that documentary.
Yeah.
Rather than just like B-roll of Martin Scorsese looking at stained glass windows,
Yeah, so this documentary is confused to me about what it wants to be, because we get in alternating strains, and it's not, I mean, I did learn a lot, actually. There's like plenty of information to gather from there, but in terms of the way that we consume documentaries now, this very much, is sort of, it's already for classical music lovers. I'm sad to say. I don't think it would make much sense to a non-classical music lover, as hard as Martin Scorsese tries to make it one of those kinds of things. So we get in kind of alternating strains the story of how the St. Patrick's Cathedral was constructed, the tapestry of the Da Ponte's story and the lead up to the concert that they're originally talking about, and then the tapestry of Martin Scorsese's childhood and like how important music was to that. And so it's confused about whether it wants to be the story of St. Pat's, the story of the original concert, or the story of how important music is now or was in Martin Scorsese's childhood. And in the end, I'm not really sure any of those three stories was told that successfully.
I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, I think that like there are YouTubers that make much more compelling documentaries than this by picking a single subject and going super deep.
It reminded me of like my high school papers where I would like write a paper and then my teacher's like, no, you need to pick one of these things and write about it instead of just make a 5-page paper about 7 things. Like,
and I see where you're coming from, Tiffany, when you say that you would need to be a classical music knowledge haver to take this. But in a way, I just think that this is for like tired people at the end of their workday who just want little bits flitting through, and it's like, if they're just sort of riding the surface of all of these.
But my point is that none of those flits make any sense
Yeah.
if they flit through without a sort of background knowledge. I totally agree. Like there's a sort of random bits of information go floating by, but without the like bedrock knowledge for you to plant those in, then you wouldn't actually come away with any sense of the topic.
yeah, even like the chapter breakdowns made no sense. I was just like, wait, we weren't in the chapter about this before? Like I felt like the chapters were kind of added like after it was just odd. I don't know. And then like the addition, like that weird interview with Jim Gaffigan and his wife.
Oh yeah, the fact that Jim Gaffigan showed up in this was like, and
that
was
was the
serving
last person
communion.
I expected.
Serving communion. It was crazy.
Okay, so here's one question that I still have after all of this time and watching this documentary about what presumably is a single watershed moment that happened at a place that was important, is what the heck was the actual program?
Yeah, it was just, and to call it an oratorio is actually very strange,
very
as far as I'm
misleading,
concerned.
right?
And also, I think that the guy gives a bad definition of what an oratorio is, because he says an oratorio doesn't have drama. But an oratorio does have drama. An oratorio is basically a concert opera after a fashion. There's different sort of versions of this, but an oratorio has drama. It has a dramatic arc.
It doesn't
tells
have
a story.
staging.
It doesn't have staging.
Or costumes.
Or costumes, exactly.
Or sets.
And to me, this was just a concert. It's not an oratorio. I mean, I don't know. If we knew more about the program, then maybe we could see that, Lorenzo da Ponte, he strung together all of these random...
Well, there was a screenshot of the program they show us, right?
But it reads like a concert program and not an oratorio.
Right, exactly.
I mean, oratorios are generally single composed works by single composers.
And I suppose that maybe the definition of an oratorio has evolved since 1826. Maybe this was, it was more of a generic term back then. You're just a concert with singing, but basically every concert had singing back then. So I don't know. It was strange. Yeah. There was also one little detail I wanted to point out when they're talking to that Italian musicologist guy. He's like, oh, yes, I have to go searching for the original texts of these songs and, and the parts and stuff. And the B-roll footage they have is him looking through a book of Gregorian chant. I'm like, buddy, you're looking in the wrong book
century,
there.
Buddy.
You're never going to find those arias in that book.
One other thing that I did notice was I wish that they would have, since we presumably know what was performed on this concert, I wish they would have used more of it, even just as the background music to some of this stuff. I mean, we were listening to all sorts of weird things.
Totally agree.
Lots of Vivaldi Four Seasons.
We had more like broken organ sounds than anything that...
Oh, that poor organ. Oh my God. Yeah. And I mean, like, boy, if you wanted to tell somebody that they were in for a boring night of watching, it's like, oh, how about we watch a documentary that's about an oratorio fundraising concert to fix an antique organ. Doesn't that sound exciting? No, I wish that we had heard more. All we really heard was at the end, we heard a very slow something. And the conductor had talked about how he had to take the tempos slower because they're playing in this very reverberant church. And it's like, well, you're a man of your word.
I presume that the sister documentary, which I don't think I kind of realized existed until I was trying to puts together information to say about this, may have more in the line of what we're talking about. But even so, with one documentary as the more historically angled one and one documentary as the one that was more documenting the concert itself and the lead up to it, this one I felt missed the mark just because it was so confused in terms of, I mean, it tried to do the thing that is very fashionable now where you have multiple storylines and you hop between them and you kind of watch each one progress somewhat in parallel. But none of those storylines actually cohere. I mean, the most compelling by far was the one that you guys identify, which is the story of the place itself, which almost seems out of nowhere. So I was left wondering, okay, we know PBS did this documentary, but who funded it?
I assume Scorsese.
No.
Of course.
Yeah, see, we have disagreement right here. Like, Scorsese wanted to tell this story, obviously, I think, but I think the church had a fair hand in it because otherwise, what do we care about the location in which a landmark concert took place unless it really, and so there was so much invested in talking about the community surrounding it and the history of the land around it and so on.
My sense that it was a parishioner of the church, that it's extremely well connected and got, because why else does Jim Gaffigan show up to that, right? I mean,
apparently it's his church,
right? So it's this whole community around it, but there's got to be money behind it, and it's they got Scorsese to go and talk about it and whatever, and then probably put up a lot of money, and it probably gave a lot of money for the organ too, because that was the main point of the.
Well, it needs it. That thing sounded like hell.
Yeah, when they said that they were going to refurb it, I was like, no, this is a this is a new organ.
This is a heap job.
Yeah.
I would just say that too. I would love a great documentary about Lorenzo da Ponte. I think that you guys are right to point out how fascinating his life was. I mean, because we just think of him as Così, Figaro, and Don Giovanni, but boy, what a telltale life he lived in terms of the story of immigration and European wars and all of this stuff. That would be fascinating too. But it was just so lightly tread,
Yes.
I mean, they didn't
I was
get into
please
any
tell
details.
me more, but then they would just kind of go back.
Maybe
to
we
whatever.
can get our friend listener Michael to write the screenplay for Lorenzo.
Ooh, yes, listener Michael, get on it. Now we're thinking. All right, we're tying the episode together.
It's going to be the first Classical Gabfest production. It's like a movie.
I will have you know that Gesualdo the podcast was the first Classical Gabfest production.
I forgot that existed.
Oh God.
Okay. Well, let us know what you think. I guess we're not suggesting that you sit down and listen to the whole 55 minutes, but there are threads here to pick at that are not that may bear some fruit. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see more of this outgrowth of this material. And it is nice to know about the concert itself.
I think listeners should watch the part 2 and report back to us about that.
Whether we should watch it? Yeah, that'd be nice.
Okay. And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode. Let's go to our classical mixtape. Kensho.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Will, what do you have this week?
Oh man, I have got a humdinger here.
Is it more French hipsters?
Okay, let me tell you guys about this.
Well, first answer the question.
I'll answer it in this is my way of answering. Okay, I've had a very busy week. I've had a lot to do, a lot of things on my plate, but everything that I've had to do has been hampered by the fact that I discovered this piece and have not been able to stop listening to it. It's a 25-minute long piece. I've watched it an average of 3 or 4 times a day.
Damn.
This is actually combines several of my interests in that it is by a contemporary French composer named Philippe Hersant. It is, however, a work written for early instruments and 4 choruses. It's called the Cantique des trois enfants dans la fournaise, the song of the 3 children in the furnace.
My
and
goodness.
It's a story that comes from the Bible. These 3 children, they would not give up their belief in God, and so some old, tribal king threw them into a furnace, but then they didn't burn, they came out, and it was great. So this piece is magical. It's pure magic. It's amazing. This composer, he's just created this world.
Thank you, William. Tiffany, what do you have for us?
Okay, this is Arvo Pärt's Cantus in Memoriam of Benjamin Britten, performed by Paavo Järvi and the Estonian National Symphony Orchestra. I don't think I have much to say about it. I just like it.
I can't really get into Arvo Pärt. Is that weird of me?
Really interesting.
I don't know. I feel like I need to
what about Fratres? The version with violin and orchestra. No?
No.
To me, his best piece is the Te Deum.
Which you've suggested before.
Yeah. I think I have, done a mixtape on that.
In the mixtape. Okay, this is where I need to start. Because I feel like, I don't know, my lack of knowledge makes me think that it's just all like super atmospheric and not much substance.
Well, it is minimalist. Like, I don't think that there's any getting around, like, he uses stacked fifths and fourths.
Right, but maybe my sense is kind of like, if I've heard one of his pieces, I've heard them all, is kind of my attitude toward it right now.
I can understand that. I would just say that that's not entirely right, and also there's better and worse versions of the one thing.
Okay. Okay, I could do with that. I'm going super normie, basic selection here. I am conducting Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony this week, and it's one of my absolute favorite pieces. So here's a little bit from the last movement. It's the last time the second theme comes back in the end, and it's just one of those glorious moments that I really am looking forward to conducting this week. So this particular performance is by, of course, the Philadelphia Orchestra and Eugene Normandy. You'll find the links to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm William White, and on behalf of Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.